You know, I prayed, and I prayed, and I prayed. And God either didn't hear me, He's not listening, He's not answering my prayer, or worse yet, maybe His answer is no. How often at one time or another have all of us felt that way? You know, we're taught to be persistent in our prayers. We're taught to be ready to tell God our fears and our desires, our anxieties through prayer. And then when we do, even when we pray fervently, sometimes we're disappointed because we feel that there's no answer. Or we assume that the answer must be no because we don't hear anything back. And what we prayed for didn't happen. I know I felt this in my life, and I expect that every one of you has had that in your life as well. Well, what do we do with these feelings of frustration? Well, let's take a look at our story in today's reading from St. Paul in the Corinthians. This is that famous story where Paul reveals that he has a thorn in the flesh that he's been dealing with. Now, first of all, we can spend a lot of time trying to figure out what that is. What is he talking about? And scholars through the millennium have speculated on what it might be. Was he sick? Did he have epilepsy or headaches? Or maybe he had some reoccurring malady. Did he have depression? Or some mental challenges? Maybe he suffered from those physical beatings that he took. Maybe he had a limp or an injury or some kind of other disfigurement. Or could it be that he had a speech impediment and he felt that hindered his preaching? The point is, we can spend a lot of time speculating on this topic, but we're not going to get anywhere because we just don't know the answer. And it's really not that important. It doesn't matter to what he's trying to tell us. So let's rather focus on what we can answer rather than what we can't in today's reading. What is Paul saying to you and to I? I think his message is universal and can apply to each and every one of us no matter what thorn we may have. First of all, we know that Paul prayed. He asked God that this thorn be taken away. He prayed for relief from this. He prayed just like we do. And I wouldn't be surprised if he felt like we do, just like us. And he may have said to himself, you know, God, are you even listening? You're not answering my prayer. And don't tell me the answer is no. You see, sometimes I think we automatically assume that the saints like St. Paul have superpowers and didn't experience what we do. But follow me on this. I think if you read between the lines, that's exactly what St. Paul is saying, just like us. I feel like God isn't listening. Sometimes I don't think He answered my prayer, but in fact, I prayed fervently 3 times, and I still didn't get the answer. And it's because he didn't get the answer that he wanted. As we go on in the reading, Paul emphasizes that what we should do when we feel like he does. Instead of allowing ourselves to wallow in the feelings of not being heard, he questioned himself. He realized that God doesn't ignore him. His prayers are listened to. And Paul had to listen more intently for the answer and ask what it meant. I think the next thing he might have said is, you know, God, I know you don't ignore me. I know that you're answering me, but I just don't see the answer yet. And that's when God said, my grace is sufficient for you. Paul realized that the answer was not to look for what he wanted. His task was to look for what he needed. And in the end, Paul admits that this thorn kept him humble. He needed it. And I think this is how God answers our prayers. He hears what we want, but He gives us what we need. Sometimes they're one and the same, but oftentimes they're not. Maybe what I think I need isn't what God knows that I really need. So my task is to ask myself, what is God saying to me in the circumstances that surround me in answer to my prayers? When God answers us, He opens the way to His plan. And we're invited to surrender what we think we need and accept what God knows that we need. His power is greater than ours, isn't it? In fact, Paul tells us that it's in the weakness and accepting that weakness that allows God's power to flow through us and make us strong. That's a paradox of our faith. When I'm weak and I surrender, God can be strong in me. So often in our prayers we have expectations and qualifiers that we hang on that prayer, and they get in the way of hearing God's answer. Remember, Paul says that he prayed 3 times before he got his answer by looking for God's will. I think that that's an intentional parallel to Christ, who prayed 3 times in the garden that he would not have to go through the crucifixion and death. God didn't say no to Jesus. He didn't just leave him hanging there, did he? Instead of saying no to his only son, God did say, "Son, I have a better plan. I want you to follow my plan. My plan is what's best for you, but more importantly, my plan is what's best for humankind." And Jesus said, "Yes, not my will, but yours be done." And what was the result of that better plan? What was the result of that final prayer? My friends, the result was the gift of our salvation. Yes, he said, "Not my will, but yours be done." And how often do we pray that prayer? But I know for me, usually I try to hold that 10% back, just in case. We need to surrender fully. Don't we really know that God's plan is what's best for us? Paul came to that conclusion in today's reading, and he's inviting us to do the same thing. It's okay to feel like God didn't answer our prayer at first. It's okay to think that maybe He is saying no. But it's not okay to stay there. God doesn't say no and just leave it at that. Every time He says no, He always invites us to take the next step, to look further, to see what His answer is. And if the answer isn't yes, God, what is your plan for me? Then we are acknowledging that He is a creator and we are His creation. We're dependent on Him like a child on their parents. And His great love for us will always bring us power and strength. And when we get out of the way and we surrender and allow our weakness to make room for His strength, then He can work through us.